Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. This is my Barns number 5 foot powered machining lathe, and this is a lot of fun. Now, I did a video on this a little over a year ago where I restored this with a collaboration with Hand Tool Rescue, and the two of us restored two of these side by side. A lot of fun. I'll leave links to that down below. The problem is I don't do a lot of machining work, but I do want to do a lot of wood turning. And unfortunately, I don't have a rest to put this on, and it becomes very annoying because this is a really, really nice lathe, but I can't use the tools, so we've got to do something to fix that, and that's what we're working on today. So let's dive into that. For this rest, we are going to be making the base out of oak. Hey, I know, surprise, surprise. We're going to be making a small piece that will grab onto the rail on the back side. Now, if you imagine this whole rail is basically one big dovetail, and we want to have an angled piece to capture that dovetail. So to find out what that angle is, I have the other, this is a foot that goes on the tail stock that then captures that dovetail. So I can use the bevel gauge to find out exactly what that angle is, bring it over this block, and slice open my thumb. Okay, I didn't actually slice over my thumb, but you be careful when doing it in weird directions. We use the bevel gauge to mark either side and then bring the square into play, connect the dots. And in this case, make sure you don't hold the block very securely so that the square slides on you and your line goes off, and you have to do it again until the line is where you want it to be. A comedy of errors. We're going to be planing this chamfer down, but as we get close to the end, I want to actually come and remove most of the very tip and put a stop chamfer so I'm not blowing out the fibers on it. So there's a chamfer right on the end there, and then I can bring the plane in and take it down to those lines. And we're just going to plane it until I touch from corner to line and on all of the marks all the way around. And that should give me exactly the angle I want. It doesn't have to be dead on exact, it just has to capture the edge of that dovetail. So that is the stop block that will then sit on the back side. You can see how it will fit there. Now we're going to create the top rail and cut that to length. This top rail is going to stick out. It'll hold the block on the back, and then it'll have a sliding clamp on the front, and you'll understand all that in a little bit here. So we need to actually connect that small dovetailed piece to this new rail with a couple carriage bolts, and this will hold them in place. So I need to mark and lay out exactly where I want these to be, but we need to have sliding holes in the main piece. The carriage bolts are just going to go through the main piece, but through the dovetailed piece, but into the main piece they're actually going to have to slide. So we're going to clamp both pieces together and drill one hole all the way through. And this will give me an accurate placement so that I know that they're in the same spot all the way through. And I'm going to blow out the other side because I really don't care. It's just going to be covered up, and so it doesn't matter. Then I'm going to move that small angled piece down 2 inches, line them back up, and then use those starting holes as the spot to then drill the second set of holes. And this will give me 2 holes that I need to connect on the main piece. Once I connect these, then I'll have slots. So we got 2 holes, top and bottom, and then we can draw all the little holes in between to make them match up. If you use a marking gauge to draw a center line all the way across, you can go at it. And I missed halfway through there. Oh well. So same thing on the other side, run all the way up it and you get this slot, but the slot will not allow the bolt to slide back and forth. We have to clean it up. And so for that we can use the chisel and connect the dots, line them up, and chisel them down. And this actually goes really, really quickly. It's a fast way of making a slot. Yes, I could come in and with a saw connect the two, but the saw is never quite as accurate, and you still end up coming with a chisel to clean it out. And so I find this to be a little bit faster and a little bit more fun. So there we have 2 slots that then capture the carriage bolt. I'm actually going to pound the carriage bolt down into the keyed block, and that will hold them in place because I want the wing nuts to be on top where I can easily access them. Speaking of which, let's play around with that, make sure that they work. Put on 2 big fender washers and then wing nuts, and make sure when you put these on that you drop at least one of them on the ground. That just makes sure you have you're doing what you're supposed to do. Next, we can move on to the other end of the beam, and I actually want to create a clamp on there. And I have this beautiful old beam clamp. The problem is that it doesn't have the other end of it. So I'm going to take this retaining piece off of this end with a screw and then bolt that onto the block here. So I can take it over there and figure out where I want it to be. And that's why I gave myself 2 inches of movement on the eye screw, on the carriage bolts, because this screw has a little bit more than 2 inches of movement on it. We're going to lay out where those marks need to be and drill 2 holes for those bolts to go through. And we can bolt this on there. I decided to use this just for the sake of easiness. I was originally planning on countersinking a couple bolts and fitting them to the head so that they snugged in there. And I was playing with that, and it worked out pretty well until I realized, wait a second, I need to actually tighten the bolts. So here is me actually figuring out how to set this. I drilled the hole the same width as the head. So from side to side, that's the diameter the hole is drilled. And then with this, I can come in and I can knock out all 6 sides of this, and it fits in there very, very nicely, really tight fit. But then I realized, wait a second, I need to actually rotate the bolts in order to put these nuts on. I can't turn the nuts down on because they're square nuts intended to lock in place. So, yeah, we're going to have to use washers and bolts. And those countersinking that I did is pretty much worthless. But that's one of the fun things of iterative learning. So, yeah, sometimes you mess up and sometimes you do things right. And other times you learn from what you do. Or hopefully you learn all the time. But sometimes you learn from other people's mistakes and sometimes you have to learn from your own. So we can tighten those down in there, and this is the basic setup of how it all goes together. You can see how this will then crank in against the other end where the block will be able to slide back and forth. Now I put it in place and figure out where I want the rest to be. I want it to be when it's slid all the way forward that the rest is about 3/4 inch off of the spinning center. That'll allow me to do small things, but then I can move it back and still be able to do something around a 6-inch diameter. So I have this piece of 1.5 by 1.5 oak, and this will go cross member on there. I am going to be gluing them cross grain, but in this case it's really not going to make that big a difference, especially with being in an air-conditioned shop. The cross grain movement is so insignificant in this size, it's not going to make any difference. I want to chamfer the top corners on this just to make them look a little pretty. Why? Because I can, and chamfers are what separate us from the animals, so let's add chamfers whenever possible. Once we get those cut down, we can bring in a plane and smooth them up, clean them, chamfer the edges, and get this the way we want it to be. We're going to glue this in place, but because I was limited on time, I decided to glue and screw it. The screws are basically just there as temporary clamps. However, they will be basically permanent clamps because I don't intend to take the screws out. So after chamfering it all up, we can then play with gluing it in. The next thing I want to do is actually create the hole for the rest to go down into. And so I want to actually test it and make sure that the drill bit I have is the right size. That has a little bit of movement, but it still slides in and out. So that's what I want. So we're going to drill a hole in the top of this block. I have it clamped, squeezed tightly in this vise, and that will keep it from splitting out because it's such a small block. This will allow me to drill the hole without cracking the block in two. And I'm going to drill and blow out the other side because I really don't care. It's just going to be glued in place. So we will get splinters, and isn't that fun? So that is the hole that the rest will go in. But now what I want to do is actually create another hole that goes into it at 90 degrees. And this will be what I can then put the threads into. So I have that threaded bit, and so I had to drill several holes until I found the insert that was the size that the insert was just right. This one just pounds in place and goes in pretty smoothly. It doesn't have to hold a ton, it just has to be enough. So now we can drill at 90 degrees to that first hole and go through into there, drive in our threaded insert, and now we have a retaining screw that can go in and hold that to keep it from rotating too much. In the end, I found out this isn't quite strong enough. I was hoping it would be a little stronger than that. I had a collar on order that would attach to the top that it would slide down into, but the collar didn't come in time for the video. So that will be put on later. Sorry, wasn't able to show you that. So I'm cutting the main rod to the right length, and then we're going to smooth it down and clean it out. There are lots of marks and things on there, as this was a demo board that I'd used in the past, but it just happened to be there and be the right size. So we can clean it up, smooth it up, chamfer the corners, because this will be what is actually facing me. So I'm going to be interacting with this. It's better to chamfer the corners and keep them a little bit safe. Round everything over and clean it up so that it is happy and pleasing. And then that previous block that holds the rest will get glued down onto it. And so I glue it down on, but we're going to pre-drill in some of these. And yes, for you Canadians, these are Robertsons, and they still strip out. Stupid Robertson screws. Yeah, we need to countersink this and fit the head down in there just flush. Not any terrible need to, but it makes me happy. So just want to go until the head is just below the surface just a little bit. So I'm going to get these screws shaped in place before we actually do the glue up, clamping one and then rotating the other one in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out the screws, and those will give me my locations. And I'm going to have the screw tips sticking out just a little bit into the other side so that I can put it back in the exact same place. Add some glue, squeeze it down on there, clamp it down, and then run those screws in. And that will be that. The screws are just there to hold the glue until it solidifies. I could take them out, but I don't need to. Last thing I need to do is do some modifications on this. It originally would have a wooden handles on there. I was thinking about putting that wooden handle on there, but I realized it's going to be sticking out quite a bit as it is, and I don't want it to stick out any farther. And as with all the other things on the lathe, all of the ends that you need to rotate would have a tool that would go on to do the rotation. So I figured I would do the same thing here. So I grabbed a file and started squaring up the end. Just picked one side arbitrarily and put a flat side on that, and then rotated it 180 degrees. Then put a corresponding flat side on the other side, and then rotated it 90 degrees and repeated until I had a square edge. Then I checked it with the tool that I wanted to use, making sure it was the right size, and then made it a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller until it just fit down in. Took a little bit of work, but it was kind of fun. Nice doing a little bit of metalworking in between until that fit into that, or the other way around. But this would allow me to not have it sticking out quite so far, but I can still get a tool in there. It took a good bit of going off and on until I found it fit down on there and was the size that I wanted it to be. So there, that is that. Now we can go on to the finishing and get this thing ready before we actually do some test work. I've got like almost a ½ inch of buildup of boiled linseed oil on the inside of this that's dried up. It's one of those fun things to have a jar over the years. I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes, 30, 40 years from now if I'm still using that same jar. And with oil and white oak, actually this is red oak, so it's not going to shine quite as much, but it's still really, really beautiful. I love the way the boiled linseed oil brings out the color in that. The longer it sits in there, you get this nice, clean, warm tone to it. It's beautiful. No real reason to do direct finishing on this. It's just a tool, but because it's going to be up against the oiled surface on the lathe, figured we might as well oil it up so we wouldn't be getting quite as oiled in the future, I guess. So let's put this whole thing together. Put on the wing nuts and try to get them on, and then try to get them on, and then try to get them on, and wing nuts. But they actually work really well. 2 wing nuts holding on one end, and then 2 square bolts holding on the other, 2 square nuts holding on the other. You can see how those come in there and tighten down on. And that's about that. We can take it over and test it in place and see how it goes. Ratchet it all down, lock it up, and make sure nothing's going to move. Put the set screw through into the tool rest. I really like these tool rests. They're some of my favorite. It allows you to get your fingers closer to the edge for a little more manipulation. Not as important for this, but for power tool lathes, that's my favorite design. And so this, you can see how it sits down in there, and the tool will then tighten up that bolt. And now we have a locked-in rest. So let's actually turn something. Have a scrap of octagonal wood, and we're going to throw that into the lathe, center it up, and start spinning. Yes, you spin this backwards, but that's a lot of fun. And yeah, it's one of those things that you think would drive you bonkers, but in reality it doesn't. Use a roughing gouge to take off the majority of the waste. And in this, I'm going to be turning it down to about 1 inch. This is going to turn into a new screw thread for one of my clamps. But it's a lot of fun to play with, move it around, and now I can do turning on my lathe.
There,
yes,
happy?
Safety first, or in this case, like
Back
3rd or
forth.
4th or 5th, whatever. But this actually works really, really well. So I'm looking forward to doing a lot more turning in the future, and it is an amazing tool to have and a serious amount of fun. Ooh, yeah. So there you have it, a tool rest
for the Barns number 5. Now, there is actually a tool rest originally made for the Barns number 5. I have not been able to find one, so if anyone ever comes across one of those, let me know. But this is really kind of fun because I can lock it on here, and now I can use this to do all of my wood turning, something I've been wanting to do a lot more of. So you're probably going to see some more turning videos coming out, which is kind of fun. I've been wanting to do more, but unfortunately it's my spring pole lathe. It takes up a large space in the shop. It's a pain to set up and take down, and it's just not great for actually turning. And if you want to see, I have several videos making the spring pole lathe. It is a fun tool to use. It is incredibly fun, but it's not very useful. This, on the other hand, is incredibly useful. It is very, very functional, and I can do very accurate turning on it. But I need the machine rest, so that's a lot of fun. Now, I'm sure a lot of people out there have other ideas, things that I could do to this to make it a little bit better, more efficient. So if you do have any ideas like that, throw those down in the comments. I'd love to read that, and maybe I'll make some adjustments to this and make it a little bit better. Also, speaking of comments, everyone who does hit comments, likes, subscribes, shares the video, thank you for that. Honestly, that really helps out the channel more than I can possibly say. As well as everyone scrolling over on the side, they are from Patreon, and members of the channel who've clicked the little join button down below. Thank you. Without you, this channel wouldn't exist and we wouldn't be able to make things like this. So thank you. If you'd like to find out more about that, there are links to that down below. And I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. There comes a point in every woodworker's career where they really get addicted to lathes and different types of lathes. And most of the time that is referred to as the turning point.